So this morning in our Dharma time, we'll be talking about the Gunas as a model for transformation. We'll sit quietly for the next several minutes. So as we sit in quiet, I would welcome you to really make contact with the ground beneath you, not just in the physical sense that you already are, but also bring your mind into contact with that. You may initially become aware of that contact at a somewhat superficial level, and then deepen your interest in and awareness of the sensations, the nuance and the subtlety included in the obviousness of sensation. And though we invite our attention to be connected to the ground, the ankles, the hips, the blanket, the mat, of course, if your mind is wandering away, you may gently coax it back to noticing. And for every moment you bring your awareness back, for every time you usher yourself back to the present moment, call that a growing strength or a celebration. While keeping your awareness connected to your ankles, hips, shins, the blanket, the mat on which you're sitting. Now lengthen your spine from the center of the belly upwards towards the crown of your skull. Notice in that lengthening process, really from the belly north, if in fact from that same center down towards the ground, you might have a deeper sense of connection. You may have a deeper sense of rooting, as trees do. Now, while keeping that sense of length to your spine and maintaining your connection to the ground, become aware of how your breathing affects your pelvic floor. You can think of the pelvic floor as the space between the pubic bones, the sitting bones, and your tailbone. You might think of it as diamond-shaped or trapezoid-shaped. So I'm inviting you to notice the experience of the breath related to your pelvic floor without having to modify or manipulate the breath itself. You're not trying to make an effort of the pelvic floor in one direction or another. That might mean subtracting your sort of yoga knowledge about Mula Bandha and experiencing really directly and intimately what is occurring here and now. And having a sense of your experience of this, now you may join your hands together in Anjali Mudra. With an exhale, you may bow your head to your heart. Release your hands and open your eyes. So one area that I need a little bit of technical help with is that I've hooked up the webcam and I'd like it to work with this Fuse program, but it looks like my computer's only using the internal computer camera. Does anybody know how to make a choice? Maybe if anybody on Fuse knows how to make that choice, you could let me know that too.
You can make a choice of the camera if you go one step back. I feel like before this screen there is an option for camera choice. If we go here.
See how preferences doesn't light up right now?
Yeah.
Is there a right-click version? Like, I don't know.
Yes. Right click on a Mac is two
Two.
fingers.
It doesn't seem to be.
So if I go, I don't get the preferences option. Maybe if I right click on the camera. Camera is on, click to turn the camera off. I don't want to do that. Maybe this guy. Audio and video settings. Okay.
Yeah, Fawn only showed me before you actually get to that screen.
Audio and video settings. Okay. Free FaceTime. We don't want that. We want this
that one. There
Okay.
you go. Good.
Oh, there they are. All right. Great. You guys are going to hear us better, and I'm going to have you see the classroom. And we're looking at you. Jay and I are looking at you. So, okay, so here are your fellow students, some of them. Here comes a dog. The dog of the hour, as it were. Okay. There we go. Okay, so this morning during that meditation, I asked you to be aware of the pelvic floor, and I'm going to go back to that after I have a sense that your breakfast is not in the way. I didn't want to do pranayama during the meditation because I know some of you just finished eating. So let's go to the topic at hand, and then I'll introduce why I was bringing up the pelvic floor during the meditation. So the model of the gunas, which gunas is spelled Gunas. Guna is singular, gunas is plural. The model of the gunas is a way of looking at the energetic patterns that we are influenced by, and as such, all of nature is also influenced by. There are considered 3 gunas. You can translate guna to mean strand, and sometimes I think of that like the strands of DNA woven together, or the strands of a braid, when somebody braids 3 together and it turns into a hair braid, because there are 3 gunas. This is a helpful model to look at it through. The gunas are called tamas, rajas, and sattva. And when I speak about the gunas, I like to think of it through the lens of yoga itself at a biophysiological level, as well as a psycho-spiritual level. And I like to talk about the gunas as a personal responsibility, looking at your brain, body, heart, your psychosocial, emotional experience. So I'm looking pretty holistically in this regard. Tamas is described as the energy that is stable, inert, grounded. In nature, we would see that as the formation of rocks or the earth itself, where its composition is relatively stable, like more stable than water, which is moving. So tamas is also like the roots of trees that grow down into the earth. It's the center of the gravitational force, pulling us all to stay on the earth. Tamas, as a force that we can describe as inert, can be very helpful because it's very stable. But when tamas goes out of balance, we end up being extra inert. Let's call that stuck. Like, we could even call it like when the stick is so deep in the mud that you can't pull it out. That the stuckness itself is takes great force to overcome that stuckness. Now, trees rely on their roots to be grounded, and we're grateful because then they can stand tall and they exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide, and they create shade, and they create fruit and homes for birds, and interesting natural phenomenon. So the tamas of the tree is balanced also by its rajas. But the stick in the mud, when it gets profoundly stuck, or when we get profoundly stuck and we're vulnerable to the unhealthy manifestation of tamas, it can end up as a kind of implosion or a collapse of your motivation or your rajas. So when we feel tamasic, and there are different times of day and different times of year that are more tamasic, when you feel tamasic, yoga recommends trying to balance that with some rajas to come back towards sattva. So rajas means that which is more energetic, it's more expansive, it's more likely to rise, like the tree growing up from its roots, or the bird taking flight. And when we once thought the earth was flat, the sunrise. You all know that the sun isn't rising, right? And it's not setting either. You're actually turning. So we call it sunrise and sunset because we have language culture. But rajas is that immense heat coming from the sun. It's that which is expansive, luminous, energetically vibrant. It's also when the daffodils push up out of the ground in February. The daffodils are pushing up out of a tamasic environment. Okay, March or April for you in Alaska. February here in Portland for the daffodils. And the hostas are making their way, sometimes a little earlier than I would like them to, because I think, oh, climate change is happening. But you do see the hostas. We saw them in December, like the size of the last digit of the pinky finger. The hostas were poking up right outside the studio here, and also in our garden at home. But that movement of the hosta or the daffodil upwards, that's rajas. And that's rajas in balance. It's unfolding itself into manifestation. But when rajas is out of balance, I often refer to that like the Tasmanian devil. It becomes chaotic, and the movement may be very voluminous and even fast, and may seem like it's going in a direction, but more often it's digging itself into the same rut that it's been playing out for a long time. The Tasmanian devil spins in place before he takes off. That spinning part is the rajas out of balance. So if we describe ourselves as having a rajasic temperament, or we're in rajasic parts of the day or parts of life or parts of the year, yoga recommends that you balance that with something more tamasic, more stabilizing. Tamasic times of day include the periods where you feel like going back to sleep. Like if you don't wake up in a vital way in the early morning when sun is rising and you feel like, oh, I just need to get more sleep, you've just entered the tamasic part of the day, and you're imposing on the body more tamas by going back to sleep. So that's not recommended, because it's a tamasic period and you're saying, oh, I'll be more tamasic. Then what you could expect to get is more tamas. Rajasic parts of the day are like when the sun is at its highest point, or when the mind feels like attacking the to-do list. And when you're in a rajasic part of the day and you're going to do rajasic activities, and maybe you have a rajasic temperament, that isn't recommended either, because you're going to get more rajas, more of the same. The sattvic periods of the day are the most important. My teacher, Shankarnarayana Joyce, who's from Mysore, his book from Shambhala was published this past December. We got the email that it's on Shambhala. Shambhala is also his publisher, and it's already sold out. So you have to go on the waiting list to get another copy of the book. I think it's called The Sacred Tradition of Yoga, or The Sacred Teachings of Yoga. And he sent an email describing, when the book was published, his supporter sent the email. He doesn't use a computer, but the email came out and was talking about the rajasic and tamasic times of day and the sattvic times of day. And he highlights, as would I, that those are the most important times of day to be sensitive to. So the sattvic times of day are dawn and dusk. It's when the light's changing. And the sattvic dawn and dusk periods are also when we practice arti. Arti means like a puja, a celebration, with chanting and candles and incense and gratitude and respect for nature and all the gifts of life. It's called arti, A-R-T-I. Puja is the ceremony or the ritual. You spell that P-U-J-A, puja. So Acharya is easier to say than Shankarnarayana Joyce, so we call him Acharya. And he said in his email, if you honor the sattvic times of day, everything else comes into balance. So rather than thinking you have to be rigorous at every single moment, is it a sattvic moment, a rajasic moment, a tamasic moment, what am I vulnerable to right now? We can ask, how can I support the sattvic parts of the day? And that starts to transition your life into a more balanced state. So what would we do with the sattvic times of day, with the sunrise and the sunset? We would listen to the news and drink coffee. For the morning part. And for the evening part, we would listen to the news and drink alcohol. Does that not sound like clear teaching? No. For the morning and for the evening, we would be practicing meditation. Arti includes meditation and chanting and an awareness of the greater presence of life. So we would be practicing meditation. We might, as students of asana, also practice yoga asana and pranayama and meditation to nurture our experience of sattva as a person in the milieu of nature. So we can't take ourselves out of the natural field. We are part of it. Like a water droplet doesn't separate itself from the ocean, it is ocean. So we practice based on our constitution and our knowledge of ourselves. If I tend to be more tamasic in the early morning, I may need to practice rajasic efforts to be in the sattvic time of day. If I tend to be more rajasic, probably at night I have to make tamasic efforts to be in the sattvic part of the day. Are you following okay as I'm saying that? No. So it's important that we go to last night's discussion of svadhyaya, and the tapas, that meaning discipline or self-nurturance, is I set myself in the sattvic parts of the day to get the most benefit from sattva. And the svadhyaya is, and what I know about myself is I'm more tamasic or I'm more rajasic, so I need to make efforts to balance that I would be in the sattvic period of the day. Now to go sweetly to Emily's confession about how we can manipulate our minds. Let's say I'm a rajasic person and the sun is rising and I think, well, probably I should stay in bed this morning because that'll be more tamasic. Therefore, after I go back to sleep, I'll feel more sattvic. This isn't clear thinking. It means that the person who's prone to being rajasic, let's say in the early morning during the sattvic period, they ought to awaken and practice yoga to support their tamas, which doesn't mean go back to sleep and so on. And the person who knows that they're more tamasic has to rouse a little bit of enthusiasm behind themselves to get up and do their practice at sunrise. You follow that okay? So then the question must be, what is sattva? What is sattvic? Sattva is, sat you hear in the word means truth or luminosity, the light of truth. So sattva is that which is expansive, it's luminous, it's clear, it's transparent, translucent. It has a quietude, a sense of peace and harmony to it. Like we may feel if we just dedicated ourselves to observe the sunrise and observe the sunset, and to really observe it, to really watch it, to be immersed in the process of the quote-unquote sunrise and the quote-unquote sunset, but to be aware of the light changing. The light, when it's transitioning like that, is very peaceful, very simple. So those are to say that rajas, tamas, and sattva act on us all the time, and we have our temperaments that we're born with, our constitutions as well. Those are your doshas. And then we have the influences of our culture. In our culture, generally speaking, we have rajasic minds and tamasic bodies. The health is not wonderful here, and people aren't that vital. There's a lot more obesity, diabetes, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, heart disease, congestion, the sort of the downward spiral of health here. But we have very active, busy minds, prone to judgment and attitude and agenda and striving and grasping and aversion, and all of that is in the rajas of mind. So you have your personal temperament, your personal constitution, your cultural influences, and then your family influences. And those things are also like miniature cultures that you're a part of. In the process of using the gunas for transformation, if you leverage the strength of each one, you transform your life based on the forces of tamas, rajas, and sattva, which, by the way, as their own elements, are completely neutral. It's not like we're judging that tamas is better than rajas is better than sattva is better than the other two. There's no judgment about them. They're just natural arising energetic patterns. It's when they go out of balance that we are at risk. So tamas becomes inert, rajas becomes like burnout, Tasmanian devil. Sattva, when it's out of balance, becomes dissociated, like floating up off the planet into the ethers, or disconnected from humanity, or aloof and like spiritually evolved but not really embodied. Was there a question?
I was just thinking what you said about people having tamasic bodies and rajasic minds, and I was wondering if that might be one of the reasons that when yoga's come to the West, it's so much about asana and like, do you think that's part of the reason why we've translated it into like mostly asana, because we're like moving bodies more and trying to like quiet the mind more to, I don't know.
I would say yes, but let's consider when yoga first came to the West, it was in the 50s and 60s. It was much less well known, and the teachings were more about the inner peace of yoga. So the teachers who came over, the swamis who came to America at that time, they were teaching about love and peace. I haven't seen the documentary Awake, but has anybody in the room seen it?
Yeah.
Huh. So his whole, he's a very sattvic individual. You just look at the photographs of Paramahansa Yogananda, and you're like, there's like a beaming light coming from him, and his steadiness in that sattva is really evident. So when he was coming to the West, and other swamis came also, their aim was to teach peace and love and harmony, and that fit really well with the 60s. Blessedly. And the way people practiced yoga at that time was much more about the relaxation and the inward contemplation and the ease. We were wearing, I was an infant in the 60s, but as I see photographs, the first book that I came across written by a Westerner about yoga was Richard Hittleman's 28-Day Guide to Yoga. Do you guys know this one? Did you see that one, Andrea? Oh. Well, the woman who is modeling is wearing a bodysuit and tights that had her feet covered. So she wasn't barefoot. She had no yoga mat. She was wearing a leotard like I would wear doing gymnastics, and wearing stockings like you might wear under a dress. That was the yoga outfit at the time. And it was a 28-day guide to yoga, so that's like a Western approach to you're going to transform your body in 28 days. But it wasn't like heavily weighted on alignment. It was geared more towards the realization of yoga as love and peace. Did you have this book also, Kim?
I've seen it, yeah.
And the first book I saw written by a Swami, which I saw before Richard Hittleman's book, the first book I had terrified my grandmother because it was Swami Satchidananda, and he was wearing like a loincloth, just the bottoms. And he had a long beard, and he was relatively hairy, and he was swallowing a long piece of cloth. So I was like, Grandma, look at this. This is so interesting. I must have been like, 8 or 9 years old. She was very concerned. And that book then went away somehow. It disappeared. So anyway, to go back to your question, sorry, I got lost in my own fun memory. When yoga first came, it was geared towards peace and harmony, and I think that was suited to our culture. Now we're transforming it, suited to our imbalances and our desires, and I suspect the Rajasic mind wants to promote something that's materialistic about the body. Like, how does it look? How does it appear? What am I getting out of it? What yoga poses can I do? What can I prove? What can I accomplish? So the Rajasic mind is moving that practice for people. But largely spoken about our culture, and some in the yoga culture, then people go out for late dinner and alcohol. And their body becomes tamasic again, and maybe they have poor sleep, and then they have to wake up in the morning and have more yoga. So one is driving the other. Now, in aspects of our yoga community where we're practicing imbalance, my observation is people's yoga practice may need to be Rajasic in the early phase, as mine was, and then we want it to balance off into a more sattvic experience of the body. So when you come to the mat, you're not tugging on tamas and rajas all the time. You're just coaxing to get closer to the experience of sattva. Am I answering your question in some way? Mm-hmm. Do you want to add to that, Jay, based on... Jay's actually practiced at studios that I haven't been to. I haven't been to many studios in Portland since the big explosion of yoga studios here. I don't get out that much.
That's exactly what my experience has been at the various studios I was before. Of course, I settled on here.
He's required to say that.
But yeah, it's all rajas. And even some of the places, individual teachers will be doing this music that was just like grating, I often referred to some of the studios that I went to as latter-day aerobics classes, basically. Mm-hmm. I got a lot out of them in terms of feeding that, and it's kind of gratifying. Kind of junk yoga to me now, but it still was very satisfying. It really hits that spot, you know. You're all sweaty and feel like you really did something.
And you
so
did.
It really, I there was definitely benefit in it, but it was, I don't think I was really heading towards sattva by doing it.
Yeah, so and I think when people first get started in a yoga practice, this is an appropriate phase to be in if their body's been very tamasic and they don't have a health condition that would put them at risk. You can take a rajasic period of yoga like that and burn some impurities away, which is one reason the room is heated, for that burning process or that tapas that comes from heat and purification in the form of sweating and detoxifying the body. That can be great, unless the person is then going to retox because they detoxed. Which I know many yoga teachers who do that. They detox with their practice and then they retox. And then they detox the next day. And then they have to retox because they enjoyed the toxifications. Then they have to detox. That actually gets exhausting, and it's one of the ways that I like to talk about the gunas, actually. So let me put this camera here on the grease board now. See if I can get that. Yeah. Okay, so maybe you could help me with this, Jay, because I don't want to get distracted by the technology, and I can't make the tripod sit still.
Seems like it might be a little bit close too.
So if you look at, last night I put tapas, svadhyaya, and Ishvari pranidhana on the grease board, and I put them as a tripod. But right now I'm going to do something similar to that, and let's say this is how many people are looking at the gunas, and I'm going to use this model for a few moments, though my recommendation for how we look at the gunas for actual transformation is not a pendulum, it's a ladder, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. But if you think of this is the tamasic side of the spectrum, and this is the rajasic side, and here's the pendulum swinging back and forth. When people are toxifying and then they have to detoxify, that's a sort of pendulum. Similar to when I said last night that people get on the wagon and then they're off the wagon, or we're really committed and then we're not so committed, or we're being accountable to our self-nurturance and now we're taking a break from that. I recently had a student talk to me after a Sunday morning class. I was referring to the need for good sleep and the need to get up in the morning and practice yoga, to get up at sunrise and have yoga practice. And she came up to me after class and she said, well, the thing for me is I'm really trying to listen to myself and be more gentle with myself. And this is an important teaching for me to internalize. And I said, yes, absolutely. You must listen to yourself. You must be gentle with yourself. And she said, well, therefore, it's best for me to be sleeping till about 8 or 8:30, sometimes 9 or 9:30 in the morning. And I said, you're listening to your imbalance. You're not listening to yourself. You're listening to your imbalance. And your imbalance tells you to sleep past sunrise and to stay in bed longer. But if we listen to the underlying health imperative of the body, you actually want to go to bed an hour or so after sundown. Particularly if you have an illness, your body will need the time for restoration. And the sleep we get before midnight is more powerful than the sleep after midnight. And we do want to wake up with sunrise and promote the cortisol cycle, at the very least, we'll use Western words, to promote the cortisol cycle that's more healthy. So I encouraged her not to listen to her imbalance, but to listen to the underlying health imperative, and to take the teachings that are bigger than her own health system, like Ayurveda and nature. And if we listen to those teachings, that going back to self-nurturing discipline, we will promote health, such that when you're listening, you're not listening to your imbalances. You're hearing the inclination of sattva from the body, the urge for that from the body. As when another student told me that really, truly, she will feel a lot better about herself and her day if she gets her to-do list done. And I said, well, you're also listening to your imbalance, which is probably more of a pitta imbalance. This other woman more of a kapha imbalance. So this pitta imbalance is asking this person to be more rajasic, get more done, and then she will arrive at sattva, which is a misunderstanding. She will arrive at more rajas and more pitta. So the tapas in that case, the self-nurturing discipline, is to set the times in the day and the pace for those activities that aren't so rajasic, things may get done, but not all of it. And you choose more wisely what you do address and how you accomplish it. So that if you were a person hooked up to biofeedback, you wouldn't be seeing the screen going crazy while you're doing your email or your errands or your meetings and your intellectual pursuits as responsibilities. You would see more of a quiet nervous system. Do you understand what I'm saying about listening to the imbalance instead of to the underlying health imperative? Okay. So this pendulum, when it's going back and forth like this, each of us tends to be somewhere on the spectrum. And this is one of the great ironies that I see about human nature. And I love this discussion, and I bring that humor to it as well, because if we aren't having some lightness of humor related to our inclinations and our human condition, we can really get tangled into it. So let's pretend that some of us in the room are more here on the spectrum. We're more tamasic. And the tamasic inclination probably includes a level of prioritizing relaxation or sleep or slower activities. And we may postpone things like phone calls and emails, and maybe even postpone like paying the bills or cleaning the floors in the house. We have secure relationships and we trust that they're going to be there ongoingly, so we might not as often be in touch with people, and we might really like Oprah while eating macaroni and cheese and like lounging around in our pajamas and feel like that is so loving. I'm so taking care of myself. I'm just being so kind right now. I'm having a timeout. I'm going to that vegetative vagus state we talked about last month.
Vegas state.
Yeah, what's that?
Vegas state.
Yeah, Vegas state. So here I am, and after this starts to nudge me, these decisions nudge me towards a more tamasic state, I get a little bit uncomfortable and say, oh, this is getting uncomfortable in that now I feel like, God, the bills have really piled up and the dust bunnies are knee-high in the house, and I'm not sure if my friends are going to remember my face, and I better make contact with people and take care of some things. So I arouse myself in this direction and I get going. I pay some bills, I answer some phone calls, I tend to my emails, I go out for a walk, the dog is happier, I take some deep breaths, my heart goes up, and I feel like, oh, I'm really getting somewhere. And after a few hours or a couple of days, I say, wow, I really made a good effort. I deserve some downtime. Because this is my barrier right here to how good I can feel, how much I can keep going in the direction of sattva. So I say, well, that was a good effort. Now I'm going to come back to my comfort zone. Well, the part of this that I have some affection for and some humor with is that the rajasic person is making the same behavior process over here. And they move themselves into a more imbalanced rajasic state with things like constant activity and busyness and more ideas to follow through on, and the to-do list that's very long, and when something comes off the bottom, something gets added to something comes off the top, something gets added to the bottom. And then sometimes you've crossed off so many things from the top and added so many at the bottom, you need a fresh piece of paper, you got to write it all down again. Does anybody do that? Uh-huh. Because that clean piece of paper gives you a sense of focus and drive, and you're going to get these things done. And maybe you make categories about which things you're going to get done under what part of the day. And you've got it all organized, and you are going to finish this. And this person might be really exercising a lot, and they eat really well, and they cook all their own food, and the house is spotless, and the relationships are kept up on, and all their social media is current. And mine's not, by the way. And so as you go in this direction, you go, oh, I'm really getting out of balance here. I'm feeling very uncomfortable. I think I should get a massage. And you take yourself in this direction where you're like, somebody else is going to help you reinforce stillness by massaging you. So that takes you to your threshold for how comfortable you are moving into balance. And after the massage, and by the way, what happens during the massage might be that your nervous system gets reset. And as you're dropping down, you get an idea about how you're going to better organize your life. After the massage, you go and do that thing that's going to better organize your life, and you go back to your rajasic pattern here. Has this happened to you also? You get like blazing clarity during the massage. You can hardly wait for it to be over so that you can act on that. I wonder if the massage therapist in the room can feel that when it happens to the client. Do you ever feel that moment with somebody, Meadow?
Not rare. I mean, no. I think people really get into that deeper relaxation state. If they enter the alpha state, then there are people who can't quite get there, and they think the whole time, but they're usually thinking
They think, oh yeah.
or talking the whole time.
Uh-huh.
But if someone actually drops into that, they usually don't come out of it until it's over.
Mm-hmm. And you as a massage therapist don't bring them out because of your own discomfort with them dropping into that. That has been my experience with some massage too. Like, I'm dropping in and now the massage therapist has a question for me. Like, how's Poquito doing? Well, I'm glad to talk to you about it, but I was just dropping into that state and it was her discomfort that brought the question on. So you're holding space for somebody to go deep like that, right? And when we hold that space as yoga therapists for people to drop in, we're also providing the opportunity for this pattern to lessen and for the person then to use tamas, rajas, and sattva to improve their experience, to transform themselves. But this is to say that we're all on a pendulum somewhere, and we have our mini pendulum inside these extremes. And most of us are radaring towards our comfort zone. And your comfort zone is somewhat predetermined by your conditioning, your temperament, your constitution. But it's not fixed. This is the really good news. It's not fixed. It's not cemented. It's elastic. It's changeable. So where yoga would refer to us with the gunas is more like this. This is my personal preference as a model for the gunas. And I use a darker color. Does that look like a ladder? Could it be a ladder?
Could be.
Thanks, Rob. Yes. So we are aiming for that which is sattvic. I mean, the more preferred outcome of our yoga practice is that we are sattvic. There is a bias towards that. But we have to rely on tamas, rajas, to get us to sattva. So tamas in this case is composed of all those things that stabilize you on the yogic journey. This includes your self-nurturing discipline, tapas. It also includes the stability of your life foundation. And we didn't all get a healthy life foundation. Some of us weren't raised in environments that promoted that. And our parents weren't either. And upstream from there. So acknowledging that we may not have been born into healthy foundation in our culture or our family lineage, there's still time to create healthy foundation for yourself. And much of that means, who do you hang out with? Who's your sangha? Who's in your community? And are they nurturing that foundation with you? It's a collaboration in that regard. So tamas, for example, means stability and foundation, and it includes things like when you go to a yoga class or a yoga center, like coming to the Daya Foundation, are the doors open? Is the heat on? Are the lights on? Are there people here to greet you? Do the systems work most of the time? Let's say 85% of the time, with my respect for my staff and the foibles that we face. But is that occurring? Is the teacher on time? Is the class at a regular time of day? Is there a lot of chaos at the studio and you're not sure who's teaching when and what's going on, and can you count on it? Part of our responsibility as yoga therapists or people who provide services is to be count-onable, to be consistent, to have our own foundation, provide foundation for the client or the community or the students. That's an honor, not just a responsibility. And it's an honor because to the extent that you provide that for others, you're creating it for yourself. So when you stabilize, as Jennifer was talking about, balancing her life last night, so that when you're in the classroom and when you're being a parent and when you're being a friend or a daughter, you're bringing the best of yourself to that. The decisions we're making they may be perceived as on behalf of others, but they have to include us. And they'll benefit others as well as benefiting us. Tamas also means that you acknowledge the forces in nature that can help stabilize you, like being asleep when it's time for sleep. The tamasic period of the day, there's 2 of them, about an hour or 2 after sundown through maybe 2 or 3 a.m., a couple hours before sunrise. That is a tamasic period of the day. We ought to be sleeping. Yes.
The further north you get to
Yes, yeah. You have to arrange it based on where you live on the planet, but as to say a couple hours after sundown and a few hours before sunrise is a tamasic part of the day. And we want to be stable, grounded, asleep. Another tamasic part of the day is like a heavy part of the day. If you've traveled into tropical countries, you know when it starts to feel heavy in the morning. Like this is after sunrise and birds chirping and it's quite lovely, and then you're going outside and the heat has gotten more intense and the humidity is kind of oppressive, and you think, oh my God, I just got to get still and go to the shade. That's a tamasic feeling of the day, the heaviness, where something's oppressing you, it's imposing itself on you. So in the tamasic periods of the day, we have to acknowledge what's going to bring health to us. Likewise with the rajasic periods of the day. Yes, Kim?
So you're saying that's in the morning?
Yes.
Because I was thinking about sort of, I think of a low point as like 2 in the afternoon, but is that more related to imbalance in terms of how we've spent our morning and what we've used for nourishment?
Yes. Yeah, because the tamasic part in the evening, we should be stable, sleeping, resting. But to give into tamas in the mid-morning during that oppressiveness, when you start to feel heavy, like the undertow is going to take you down, we actually want gentle activity to keep us alert. Like, we don't want the tamasic undertow right there. That's where tamas goes out of balance. And in the afternoon, we're actually moving in the highest point of the sun. It's a rajasic period of the day. And that rajas will actually continue until sundown if people excessively burn that flame. Yeah. So if you get that undertow at about 2 o'clock, you may actually have needed rest earlier in the rajasic period. And you might have given into too much rest during the tamasic period. So when you got to the rajasic period, you didn't have the juice for it. Does that make some sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't suggest siestas?
Oh, I love siestas. But people who are napping for hours in the afternoon, we don't recommend. Siesta, like 15 or 20 minutes of rest. Deliberate, conscious rest after eating the midday meal. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then that's during the rajasic
Yeah.
period.
To promote that rajas doesn't go out of balance. Yeah. Yeah. So here, if we have healthy foundation, what occurs for us is that you have the container through which you can rise. Like this. So if we don't have a healthy foundation, we are acting more like, let's say that there were little holes in this container like this. These are the pockmarks I'm making. And you keep trying to hold something like energy, vitality, prana, but it's constantly dropping, draining out like this. So as much as a person tries to fill their tank here, their tamasic support, the leaks in the tank cause that to get drained. And those leaks are usually mental, little mental thought processes, mental aspects. So when that's getting drained, you don't have the container with which to rise. It's as if this were a spaghetti strainer. This tamasic chunk was a spaghetti strainer, not a healthy ceramic pot that could hold water. That spaghetti strainer model is what most people are experiencing when their rajasic mind is imposing itself on their tamasic body. So for every rajasic mind, the thoughts and the patterns are causing activation at the level of the brain, causing biochemical rushes, causing endocrine changes and immune changes, and the health of the system is actually getting drained. And rajasic minds are very common in our culture, so not to say that people are bad or wrong for having it, but know that it accelerates itself, and in community it accelerates itself double, triple, quadruple the speed, because your rajasic mind is in the company of other rajasic minds. So we go back to our tamasic foundation includes people who are trying to stabilize their minds. Who you keep company with is very important. And if we keep company with people who want to promote chaotic minds, then we'll have more likelihood of chaotic minds ourselves. If we keep company with people who want lethargic minds, we'll likely have more lethargic minds ourselves. And if we keep company with people who want stable minds, let's say stable towards equanimity and serenity and tranquility, we may be able to promote that for ourselves too. You understand? So mental states are rajas, tamas, sattva. Foods are rajasic, tamasic, or sattvic. Activities are rajasic, tamasic, or sattvic. Times of day and seasons of the year also. So if you have a strong container and energy is rising, you come up through here into rajas, and the energy continues to rise. So you're essentially climbing the ladder. But what happens for most of us is that we've gotten uncomfortable. At some point we get uncomfortable here that we're gonna break like our personal barrier. Think of it like a sound barrier. We're about to rise beyond our conditioning into equanimity, serenity, tranquility, sattva. We're about to be more genuinely blissful and luminous, less attached and grasping and aversion, more floatable, more buoyant. We're about to experience that. And we say, not consciously, but say, oh my gosh, I'm getting uncomfortable. And we take a little detour, and these become horizontal escape hatches where our rajas is now going out horizontally instead of going up vertically. Horizontal rajas is like desire and grasping. It's materialism and consumerism and so on. Also, if birds only flew from the ground horizontally, they wouldn't get very far. They'd be bumping into things all the time. This is much like in the human consciousness. You're always going horizontally based on desire and aversion, and so you're vacillating back and forth. You'll keep bumping into things. So important that rajas is for rising, it's for moving your awareness vertically towards sattva, not horizontally towards more rajas. What can happen here is that you may have had a healthy foundation and you got up and into the swirl of rajas, and now you're draining yourself, and you keep falling back down to tamasic states, and then you have to rise again towards the possibility of rajas. This becomes a cyclical process. Has anybody experienced that? Yes. Quite likely you've experienced it. You've also experienced the haunt for sattva, otherwise you wouldn't be in a yoga therapy training. So when this is occurring, when you get to that threshold where you start to feel the effervescence, as I quoted Mary Oliver several months ago, you start to feel the mist on your face. Do you remember this quote? Let me say it again, just in case you weren't able to hear it. So she's talking about this threshold right here. She says, in the beginning of this paragraph, she says, lift your oars from the water and float a while. She's referring to the process that people have been rowing upstream for too long. They're rowing upstream away from something, which she's referring to as love and ecstasy and awakening. And as they're rowing upstream, it's exhausting. So she says, lift your oars from the water and float a while. Let your arms rest. And then, when you start to hear the roiling and the pounding, when you can feel the mist on your face, row towards it. She's referring to the waterfall. She's essentially saying, row off the edge of the waterfall and let yourself go. Plummet into what the possibilities are. And she's talking about it as a transformational thing, as a positive thing, not crashing and burning at the end of the waterfall. She's just saying, we're all rowing upstream away from love and experiences of life. So let's pause, rest, let the current carry you. And when you can feel the mist on your face, row towards it, lean into it. And likewise, when you start to feel this little effervescence right here, yoga says you need more rajas and tapas. That's where you need more discipline, not to eject yourself into the side margins that go down. We need more focus. Rajas is focus. We need more clear motivation. We don't need to catapult ourselves over that discomfort. We actually have to experience it. resolve it. That's why tapas also means purification or transformation. So we're resolving the blockages, the samskaras, by letting ourselves rise through here and experiencing sattva. And then we have the experience of luminosity or awakening. So I have a question before we do some, I'm going to talk about Dan Siegel and then we'll do some practice together. Have you, as yoga teachers or yoga therapists and or in other forms of your work or your life, have you experienced feeling like so satisfied and so clear and so elevated from some gesture you've done or a class you taught or an interaction you've had with a client or another human? You just felt like, oh my God, I'm like floating right now. I feel so positive about that. That was so uplifting. I feel so elevated. I feel so what life could be. You have had this experience? And then did you get some coffee or wine or pick up the phone and call somebody or dissipate the energy that you just experienced? Uh-huh. Yes. Or did you think maybe having a glass of wine later and that was enough to sort of dampen the elevation? Yeah, or you might have it unconsciously. You're like, I'm feeling so well. When I get home, I'm going to practice meditation. But then you got there and you're meditating with the refrigerator door open. Somehow the remote ended up in your hand. This is what I hear from my yoga students all the time, and also have experienced as a yoga teacher and with my yoga teacher companions, that there can be this swell of like beauty and goodness and possibility and sattva, and it gets dampened or dissipated. Dampening is tamas, dissipating is rajas. We actually cause that to happen. Some of us cause it to happen because the schedule is too tight to have the time to revel in that feeling of sattva. The next client's coming, or I've got to drive to the next class, or I got to get this email in before the next person comes. So how we've scheduled ourselves doesn't leave the space for that sattva to overwhelm us, to overcome the tamasic and rajasic habits. So if you know that to be the case, even tamas, rajas, and sattva are used for your scheduling. We were just talking in the office a couple days ago that Jessica needs a sign on her computer that says the doctor is in or the doctor's not in, like Lucy from Charlie Brown, like in or not in. And I said, I want a hospital curtain. So it just goes right around my desk. It's closed or it's open. Because sometimes you just need that time out, and explaining it verbally is not what you want. And sometimes we don't have solitude in our office, and sometimes that is the need. So we're identifying need, and then we have to figure out how to meet that need together. So, but again, you're going to be doing this interpersonally, not just intrapersonally. But how will you sustain those moments that are luminous if your schedule's too busy to allow for it? You have to change the schedule. The room got very still. Did you guys feel that? Like,
Yeah.
oh no.
I kind of swing. I swing back and forth. I mean, I'm saying, yeah, I have those moments of sattvic moment, but then I go into the house and there's my husband, and or I have those moments, and in the summertime, the garden is wonderful, and I'll take a walk in the garden in between clients, and I'll come back and I'll maintain it. So I can see how I do both, but doing both is a really big kind of swing. I find myself subject to
One moment.
the fact.
Can you plug this in? It just went out.
I think I'm a little subject to whether it's maybe the weather, maybe it's darkness, or mood of my husband, or whether the children are home or not, or I'll find myself subject to the outer. And there'll be times when I will, I've probably gotten better over my life to being better in response. I mean, I have.
Yeah, we do improve.
I do improve. I have improved, but I still can watch myself be, subject to.
Yeah, and so make sure this camera's on too, if you wouldn't mind. One of the things that I've noticed is that each of us is on the pendulum or the ladder somewhere, and so then something, maybe subconscious, maybe conscious, we know to whom we might turn to also dissipate or dull our experience. And to whom we want to share our experience. We're like, oh yeah, I really want to share this like sattvic, luminous, open-hearted thing with so-and-so, and I'm hoping they're going to be available for it. But if I have good foresight, I may know when they are or aren't available for it. Like if Jay's on his computer doing his bookkeeping on QuickBooks using my old MacBook Pro, it's not a happy state. Sorry to say so publicly, but the mouse on that computer is a little bit broken and the keys are a little bit slow. It's a very old computer. That's why I got a new one and so I know it's not a time to kind of intrude on my desires for that sattvic merging of the two hearts and souls. He's doing his bookkeeping and he's on the computer, so I have to watch my expectations, and also if I'm setting myself up for my bubble to get a little bit popped. And did I do that consciously or subconsciously? Sometimes one or sometimes the other. So that's a place where we can pan back to a little bit of that svadhyaya, the self-reflection. Oh, I just did that thing. Like I could see you walking in sometimes and Ray would be totally jazzed and open and you guys could share the moment. Or he might be in his architect brain doing something and then the bubbles get popped like that. It's harder to tell for me with teenagers. I just want to grant that for the young adults and teenagers in your life. It's harder to know how the interaction is going to go. But we are these swirls of rajas, tamas, and sattva.
They like popping your bubble. You're doing well.
Yeah, well, let me give you this model that Dan Siegel talks about, and it's interesting to see it given our conversation here. He draws it like this, and I'm going to use his acronym, though I tease about the fact that he has these acronyms. So I can't remember them all. I mean, some of them are just too dense. There's too many of them, but the ones that I do remember I find useful. So
There's like 20 acronyms.
I know, it goes on and on. So this is here like a little river, and these are the river banks over here. And often at a river bank, we know that the current changes right there. He talks about it in this manner, that on the one hand, some of us sit on this river bank where we tend towards more rigidity. Now, this is important, understanding that which is rigid is tamasic, including the patterns that you're doing that might look rajasic. They might look like the Tasmanian devil. But the fact that your fast-paced pattern isn't easily changed, that you keep repeating it, that it's ongoing for you as a temperament, that's actually a tamasic manifestation. You're stuck in busyness, that's tamasic. You might appear to be really fast-moving, and so somebody says, oh, she's so rajasic. But if she's always that way, if that's the ongoing, she's got a rajasic pattern that has become tamasic. It's gotten stuck. It's hard to challenge it. It's less likely to change. A person feels affronted when you ask them to change it. They feel uncomfortable when they change it themselves. And they go back to the pattern that is the comfort zone. So that's a tamasic event. And on this side, he says people end up with chaotic temperaments. And chaotic in this case is more like unpredictable, which we're going to call rajas as just a manifestation. That is to say, its unpredictability is what he calls chaotic and what I'm going to call rajas for right now. So a person might be even to themselves really unpredictable. Am I scheduled today? Am I not scheduled? Am I fast moving? Am I slow moving? Do I do this? Do I do that? I don't seem to go in any particular direction. I don't have traction in direction towards my health or my transformation. So that person's temperament, their manifestation according to Dan, is more chaotic. And the optimal place he would call FACES. F-A-C-E-S stands for 5 things. Should I pop quiz you, Maddie?
Flexible, adaptable,
Adaptive.
cohesive. I can't remember the last two.
This is very interesting. Flexible, adaptive, and cohesive, energized and stable. The balance of rajas and tamas. So F stands for flexible. That means the person's narrative about themselves and their relationship to life, it has the capacity to be flexible. They were going to do this, but now they're able to do that. Circumstances have changed, and they're sort of flowing through that. Their flexibility is whole system flexible. They're adaptive. So they can adapt to the conditions at hand, and they do that without a sense of being imposed on or dissipated or dulled. They're flexible, they're adaptive, but they're also coherent. So it's not flexible and adaptive like, I have no boundaries, I don't have a sense of self, I always bend to what other people are doing. There's also a cohesiveness about it. So we'll write cohesive under. That there's a sense that that person exists, not like they just have total porousness and we can do whatever we want and they're going to bend to it because they're what we call in our culture a people pleaser. No, they're flexible, adaptive, coherent or cohesive, and they're energized and stable. So there's vitality in the system, but there's also a sense of grounding. So this would be how he would be describing the sattvic state. It's flexible, it's adaptive, the brain is able to be cohesive, it sees its own narrative, it sees it with a kind of, it's willing to change its narrative, it's not fixed on the past, it's not grasping for the future, and there's a feeling of energized, aliveness about it, but not a kind of chaotic bumbling about. So this is the FACES model from interpersonal neurobiology. Dan is the creator of that term, interpersonal neurobiology, so he's like the founder of the field of thought in that regard. Not the founder of the science, the founder of putting the field together and calling it interpersonal neurobiology. Yes?
Is that the FACES conference that also takes place?
Yes. The FACES conference is based on the work of Dan Siegel and primarily brings together psychologists and clinicians and researchers and scientists who are talking about neuroscience, neurobiology, and interpersonal mindfulness and the brain. Yeah. We went to the FACES conference a couple of years ago. It's where we got to meet Ron Siegel, who's more handsome than Dan Siegel and probably a little funnier. He's very witty, he's very personal, very warm. We also saw Richard Swartz, who established family systems therapy. He's phenomenal. And several other practitioners. Serena Saturna was there from Corvallis talking about the brain and compassion. And there was a guy who uses haiku as a therapy model. And he's a Buddhist practitioner and a haiku therapist. That was also very interesting. So the FACES stands for flexible, adaptive, cohesive or coherent, energized and stable. And those conferences are to teach people about this. So in light of that, what I like to think of on that model that I had as the ladder a bit ago is that at the bottom we have foundation. We also have faith that I talked about last night in response to Maddie's question. Faith in the general intelligence of life, faith in the science of yoga as we've heard it described by scriptures and teachers and ancestor yogis, and faith in ourselves when yoga is applied to us. And then we need to have courageousness for when we're breaking the shores here from our rajasic or tamasic habits. We need the courage to swim to the center. Or the courage in that ladder model, the courage to rise into the sattvic state. And then when we discover ourselves in the sattvic, we need the willingness to stay in that luminous understanding. So the system has to keep getting nourishment from our faith, our courage, and then to stabilize in that sense of lightness. And by lightness here, I mean luminosity. I don't mean lightness like the weight of something. I mean like luminosity. This is why my teacher, if you meet him someday, and I did get an email in December that he's coming to America and that he'll be somewhere in the Northwest in May and that he might be at this studio. But then I didn't get the next email yet, so I'll have to let you know if it's happening. It will be an awesome month if Gabor Mate and Acharya are in Portland in the same month. But when you meet Acharya, you'll see that he and his wife, Vijaya, they live sattvic lives, right down to the fabrics that they wear and what they're willing to sit on when they're at the yoga studio, which is not a wool blanket or a rubber yoga mat, and the foods that they eat, and the kinds of lodging that we organize for them when they're here, which doesn't include a bed, and includes a kitchen stocked only with certain foods and substances. It doesn't include pet hair. They don't stay at our house. Also, my teacher, colleague, friend from Varanasi, who's a musician, he's coming with his father back to America, possibly in May. Could be a really big month. And they stay with us. They're musicians, they live in Varanasi, they're sitar players, and they have relative interest in the sattvic life, and they also have traveling road musician lives. And they have to adapt to their circumstances, different than my philosophy teacher. So, but the quality of life is to say where you're placing yourself for the possibility of transformation or not. We have choices to make. Like the colors that we're wearing in here, white is considered sattvic, black is not. Black also shows all the pet hair. Red is not a sattvic color, it's a rajasic color. What's that?
Blue is for the Seahawks.
Blue is for the Seahawks, okay. So even it goes down to color therapy and sound therapy and so on. What's sattvic, what's rajasic, what's tamasic. My teacher always says, if you pet a dog, wash your hands right away. I don't do that. I pet the dog and I enjoy it. But we have very different cultures, very different lives. And for me, petting my dog it's a fun, playful, affectionate thing. For my teacher, dogs are wild and they carry diseases in India. And it's the case when you see the dogs there that you wouldn't want to pet that dog and then not wash your hands.
And they're rajasic, right?
They are.
Rajasic.
Rajasic, yeah. Mm-hmm. One morning at the outside cafe in the middle of Varanasi on the dirt street where they were doing some construction down the way with like a miniature steamroller, we were waiting for our cups of chai, Jay and I. This must have been 4 o'clock in the morning, waiting for our little cups of chai, and the chai wala, the man making the chai, had just put the bench out, and then the cows came over to stand right next to us with their butts facing us while we were waiting for the chai. And he has these sort of somewhat possibly clean cups and then these disposable little cups that are supposed to be, they're the first time use and then you toss them in and they burn. So we had actually brought our own ceramic cups. If you're going to drink chai in India, bring your own cup. And so we were waiting for the chai sitting, and then it became evident that the cow was about to pee. So this would not be a sattvic experience of chai on the street in Varanasi. So Jay actually took a picture of me waiting for the chai sitting there just before the cow was about to pee on us. And so, back to flexible, adaptive, and so on. And you have to have enough energy to get out of the way and move. So you cannot prioritize yourself on the bench over the cow having to pee. You have to be flexible enough for that. So this is to say not everything in India is sattvic, but we're aiming for the sattvic experience if we're on the path of yoga. And you can experience sattva amidst rajas and tamas. Yes, Meadow.
Working with just this idea that, so your teacher has some pretty particular ways to eat and live and be.
Yes.
And I can see how you'd want to choose things that encourage your own sense of self-balance. That makes sense. On the other hand, there's also a certain element of rigidness that I'm kind of trying to still work out in my head. Like, so where's the line between rigid and choosing things that support?
Yeah. This is a good question. So
Very flexible.
It doesn't. I mean, this is the brief description you gave.
yeah.
Didn't.
I'm glad you asked because I'll round out the story by saying this. First, as a Westerner, have you experienced when you make values or priorities for yourself that some of your family members or friends don't understand it? Mm-hmm. That you're not eating dairy anymore and they're like, well, what's that about? Or you're not eating gluten right now and so they think, oh, that's a little bit narrow-minded. What's wrong with gluten? Or like, I can't eat potatoes and I can't drink vodka, so like, what's wrong with you that you won't do those things? So you've made some choices about your diet or your lifestyle or your routine to support your vitality and your health. And sometimes it's to support you not having an allergic reaction to something like, in my case, shellfish or potatoes or walnuts. So there are things I deliberately say no to, and I'm actually rigid about it because I know that my health will suffer if I eat those things. In Mexico, we ordered ceviche de pescado solamente, and we double and triple checked. This is ceviche de pescado solamente pescado, see? Oh, yes. And I took a bite and I was like, this is the strangest fish I've had in like a long time. And then I didn't have my glasses on, so I put the glasses on and I could see the shrimp tails. And I was like, I just ingested shellfish. And I wasn't going to vomit it up, and I haven't had shellfish in a long time, and I am allergic to shellfish except for scallops. So we just waited to see what was the reaction going to be. In the middle of nowhere, without no EpiPens, no anything.
Really
we were really in the middle. I mean, we were like further nowhere than nowhere from where we were staying in our palapa. We had to take a boat for an hour to get to this destination where we were snorkeling and having the ceviche. And later in the afternoon, it was very evident that the reaction was growing as I was getting a rash down my leg, a bumpy red rash that was painful down my left leg. And then it passed. I have enough health in my system to not, and I only had one bite of the shrimp. So yes, I'm generally rigid about shellfish and now potatoes and walnuts. So that is to say, my teachers made choices that are considered sattvic, and it's also for his health and his clarity as a teacher. And should you meet him, has anybody met Acharya besides Jay? So there's a quality in his presence that is very grounded, very stable. He's absolutely committed to the teachings of yoga. He struggles through some of his English. It's not his first or second or third language. And yet he's the feeling that comes through him when I'm in his presence is of absolute depth, and the lineage that stands behind him I can feel coming through him. And I'm not sure if you had that experience in the room with him.
Yeah, when he walked through the doors, it was at the end of our 200-hour training, and the whole energy of the room just shifted.
Mm-hmm.
It just went,
yeah.
Because we're all standing there, where is he, he's late.
Yeah.
Where's his guru?
Yeah, and he walked in with his wife behind
he walked
him.
in with his wife, and it just went,
you just get these, I mean, I have goosebumps right now to remember that moment when he walked in here, and it's overwhelming to feel that in his presence. And after that visit, which was the end of your training, I was going to Brighton Bush Hot Springs, and I had Poquito in my car with the windows down because he couldn't come inside the studio when Acharya was here. And I was driving off, and Acharya walked just outside these windows, and I parked my car to say goodbye to him. And he saw Poquito in the back seat, and he said, "You have dog?" And I said, "Yes, this is Poquito." And he looked at Poquito, and he looked at me, and he said, "Very sweet." And then I drove off to Brighton Bush. So he wasn't rejecting of the dog or of me, and he repeatedly expressed his gratitude to me for hosting him here at the studio. And none of that was diminished when he saw my dog in the car. And he knows that Westerners have dogs as pets, and he has the capacity to see our Western life, to teach yoga as he understands it, and then to say, "And I know you're Westerners, and I don't mean to be an insult to your lifestyle, but I'm loyal to the teachings of yoga." So am I describing your experience also? You want to add to that?
Yeah, I had a similar thing. In fact, as you were talking about it, I was reflecting on how it's still in me, that it just seems so rigid. But I think the allergy analogy is a good one. But it's even if it's not an allergy, there's some things you just know aren't good for you. And there is that firmness about not engaging in it. That I think that's probably a better way to interpret it. At least that's the way it feels more comfortable to me to interpret what it is. I never really entirely discount any hypothesis, really. So part of my brain's still holding the idea that there's some rigidity in that, but it doesn't seem to fit in that case. There's a lot of things in my life where I've just decided, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Or I have done it, and I'm not doing that anymore. And the rigidity I use as a tool when it's rising and tempting.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a tool almost. It's like, no, I've drawn a firm line here. I'm not going to do that. And that, and in some sense, in a practical sense, it is certainly rigid, but it doesn't seem to be the rigid stuckness that I think is what we're really talking about.
I think of it as valuing or prioritizing or maintaining your commitment to. And for Acharya, my sense is that those commitments are as natural as it is for us to prioritize hydration or yoga relative to how our community at large doesn't prioritize that. They might look at us as like, God, they're so disciplined. But it doesn't feel like white-knuckling your way to that discipline. It feels like flossing your teeth, drinking your water, and just the naturalness of things. For him, his system is so clearly supported by the choices he's made that when he comes to America, he requests that we support that, and with honor for him, we do. I also know that his commitment to teaching yoga, he was a professor in a university, a professor of Sanskrit and Ayurveda and yoga philosophy. And that became less and less interesting, and he's created a school to keep the 26 arts of yoga alive in India. And he's teaching to young children to keep these arts going generation after generation. Similarly with my music teacher, that they see the commitment to classical Indian music dying out, and he has a school in Varanasi for children to learn music, as well as Westerners can come. And they both made these dedications to their life mission, and with Acharya I sense this is what must come through him, and to best support that at his age, he can't mess with his sattvic lifestyle. He's well over 65, maybe even over 70. It's very hard to read his age because of his presence. But if you read his wife's age, you may have better sense. She's also very committed, but she's aging differently than he is. So to have that come through them and to have this immense responsibility, they have to maintain their well-being. And I see that as role models for me, to be more sensitive to what it is to maintain our well-being so we don't fall into resentment or unclear teachings or feelings of being burdened by our honor and responsibility. Yes, Jennifer?
I think it makes a difference to the fact that he or someone who might have a really disciplined lifestyle isn't necessarily being judgmental about it towards others or forcing it, trying to force it on others or convince. I mean, that kind of takes away from the rigidity to me. If they can be content in their own practices and they're showing the example, but not trying to press it onto other people or be really judgmental or look down upon.
Yes.
That makes a difference.
In fact, that's very clear in him also. There is a judgment towards the Western lifestyle, though he can see its capacity to prevent yoga rather than promote yoga.
It sounds like he's very compassionate and loving and affectionate towards that and trying to help.
Yes. He's also profoundly humble. There was a moment, I don't know if you were here that morning, when he was remembering great beings who had been his teachers and his inspirations. He was remembering Ramana Maharshi, who's also one of my teachers, and he actually had to end the satsang because he was weeping. It was towards the end of the satsang, but he went very inward. You could see Vijaya, his wife, sometimes provides his English to him. She has more English than he does. You could see her honoring of his response to remembering Ramana Maharshi as an inspiration. And you could see him go deeply in. Then he was tearing. And then he said to her, in his own native tongue, that the satsang, it would end with silence. And, that was... He didn't want to leave that space and dishonor what was happening. So he's profoundly humble in this way. And that's also why I can call him my teacher. I don't use that word lightly. Similar with Saraswati, who many times would fall to silence for her own compassionate response to the human condition. We saw her in Chennai last year. Yeah. So I've went a little overtime on the scheduled Dharma talk, and I do have plans for pranayama for you, but I need to give you a bathroom break before we do that. So I will say thank you for being here and for your questions. Let's take a bathroom break and then we'll come back.